Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step carefully onto a strip of land that looks less like a new beginning and more like a damp experiment that may or may not work. The air is thick, the river moves slowly beside you, and the ground under your boots feels soft in a way that does not inspire confidence. You take a breath and catch the scent of wet earth, wood smoke, and something faintly sour, as if the land itself is undecided about letting you stay. You glance around and realise quite quickly that you probably would not survive this without a fair amount of luck and a very strong stomach. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and the time where you are right now. Now dim the lights. You stand at the edge of Jamestown in the early 1600s, where the promise of a new world has already begun to show its less glamorous side. The river in front of you looks calm, almost inviting, but the water carries a faint brackish taste that you will come to know all too well. It is not quite fresh, not quite salt, and entirely untrustworthy. Still, it is what you have. Around you the settlement feels unfinished, as if it has been placed here in a hurry. Rough wooden structures lean slightly, their walls thin and uneven. Smoke drifts lazily from a few chimneys hanging low in the humid air. There is movement, but it is not the confident movement of a thriving place. It is slower, cautious, measured. A widely accepted historical detail is that Jamestown, founded in 1607 by English settlers under the Virginia Company, was the first permanent English settlement in North America. That word permanent carries a quiet weight here because permanence is not something you can yet feel. Everything about this place suggests that it could just as easily disappear. You take a few steps forward, your boots pressing into the soft ground. The mud clings slightly as if reluctant to let you go. Each movement reminds you that this land has its own rhythm, and it does not quite match yours yet. There is a sound nearby, low voices, someone arguing though not loudly, the kind of argument that has been repeated too many times to require energy. You catch fragments: food, work, responsibility, the usual things that begin to matter very quickly when survival is uncertain. You notice the people. They're thinner than you expected. Their clothes, though, still recognisable as English in cut and style, hang a little looser, a little more worn. Faces carry a kind of quiet tension. Not panic, not yet, but something close to it held just beneath the surface. You might have imagined arrival here as something grand, a bold step into opportunity. Instead, it feels like stepping into a question that no one has answered yet. Some accounts from the time suggest that many of the early settlers were not farmers or labourers, but gentlemen unaccustomed to physical work. That small detail lingers in the way people move around you. There is effort, yes, but also hesitation. As if hands that once held quills and cups are still learning how to hold tools. You pass a structure that looks like a storehouse. The door is slightly open, and you catch a glimpse inside. Barrels, a few sacks, not nearly as many as you would hope. The space feels too empty for comfort. There is a certain understanding among historians that the choice of Jamestown's location was driven by defensive concerns. The site set along the James River offered protection from Spanish ships in a position that could be fortified. It seemed strategic, sensible even. Yet that same location also brought problems that are harder to see at first glance. Poor water quality, mosquito-filled marshes, soil that does not always cooperate. You do not need a scholar to explain that to you. You can feel it in the air. The humidity wraps around you like a damp cloak. Your skin begins to notice it first, then your breathing. It is not overwhelming, but it is persistent. A quiet reminder that this environment is not designed for your comfort. A small movement catches your eye. Someone carrying a bucket from the river. You watch as they walk carefully, trying not to spill what little they have collected. The water inside shifts slightly, catching the light. You already know somehow that it will not taste good. Still, it is necessary. You take another slow breath. There is something else here. Not just discomfort, not just uncertainty. There is also a strange kind of determination. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not announce itself, but you can see it in the way people continue moving, continue working, continue adjusting. You walk further into the settlement. The sounds begin to layer, a hammer striking wood in a steady rhythm, the faint crackle of a fire, a cough from somewhere nearby, then another. These small sounds do not fill the space. They sit within it, spaced apart, leaving room for the quiet to remain. You pause for a moment and look back toward the river. It glimmers faintly under the light, offering a view that almost feels peaceful if you do not think too much about it. You could almost imagine for a second that this place might settle into something stable, something livable. But that thought does not stay long. There are stories, some less commonly mentioned, that early settlers sometimes spent more time searching for imagined gold or quick profit than securing reliable food sources. It is a curious detail, almost difficult to believe when you stand here now, surrounded by the clear need for basic survival. Yet it speaks to the mindset that travelled across the ocean with them. Hope perhaps mixed with a certain kind of misplaced confidence. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the ground beneath you again. It's not solid in the way you would prefer. It gives just enough to remind you that nothing here is entirely stable yet. You notice the sky. It stretches wide above you, pale and open, with a softness that contrasts with the heaviness below. There is no immediate threat in it, no storm gathering, no sign of danger, and yet the calm does not reassure you as much as you might expect. Because here, danger does not always announce itself in dramatic ways. Sometimes it is in the water you drink, sometimes in the air you breathe, sometimes in the slow realization that what you thought would be manageable is far more demanding than you imagined. You begin to understand that survival here is not about a single challenge. It is about many small ones layered together, each requiring attention, each quietly shaping your days. You take another step, then another. There is no clear path laid out for you, no sign pointing toward comfort or ease, only the continuation of this place with all its uncertainty stretching ahead. You move forward anyway, because that is what everyone here is doing. And for now, that is enough. You continue forward and the sense of uncertainty does not disappear, but it begins to settle into something more familiar. The entrance to the fort stands ahead, marked by rough wooden walls that rise in uneven lines. They are not tall enough to feel truly protective yet, not low enough to ignore. The wood is pale in some places, darkened in others by weather smoke and time. When you run your eyes along the surface, you can see the grain, the splits, the small imperfections that remind you how quickly all of this was put together. You pass through the opening. Inside, the space feels tighter than you expected. The fort encloses you in a way that is both reassuring and uncomfortable. It offers a boundary, but also a limit. The air seems to linger here, held in place by the walls carrying with it the scent of ash, damp wood, and bodies that have worked too long without rest. A well-known fact among historians is that the early Jamestown fort was built in a triangular shape with bulwarks at each corner for defense. It sounds orderly when described that way. Clean, planned. But standing here, the angles feel less precise. The lines are there, yes, but softened by haste and necessity. You sense that survival dictated the design more than elegance ever could. The ground beneath you is packed more firmly here, though, still uneven. You step carefully, avoiding shallow ruts where water once gathered. The memory of rain seems to stay in the soil even when the sky is clear. Around you the buildings cluster close together. Small houses, storage spaces, work areas. Their roofs slope at slightly different angles, as if each one has its own quiet opinion about how things should be done. There is little space between them, and the narrow gaps create corridors of shadow that feel cooler, though not entirely comfortable. You hear voices again, but they are softer now. Not arguments this time. Conversations, low, steady, practical. The kind of speaking that happens when people have learned to conserve energy even in their words. Someone passes by you carrying a bundle of wood. Their steps are slow but steady. Their posture slightly bent from repetition rather than weakness. They do not look at you for long. Just a brief glance. Enough to acknowledge your presence, not enough to invite conversation. You notice how everyone seems to be doing something. There is no idle movement here, even stillness looks purposeful, as if it's only a pause between tasks. You move deeper into the fort. The sounds begin to organise themselves. A hammer striking wood in a consistent rhythm. The scrape of something being dragged across the ground. The soft murmur of voices blending together. Each sound takes its place, forming a quiet pattern that repeats without needing attention. There is a lingering understanding among scholars that early fort life in Jamestown was defined as much by confinement as by protection. You can feel that now. The walls are meant to keep danger out, but they also hold everything in, the smells, the heat, the tension. Nothing escapes easily. You pass a cooking area. A small fire burns low, its flames steady but not strong. A pot rests above it, and the contents inside move slowly, thick and indistinct. The scent reaches you before the sight does. It is not unpleasant, but it is not inviting either. It smells like something that exists to sustain rather than to satisfy. A person stands nearby, stirring the pot with a slow, practiced motion. There is no hurry in the movement. No expectation of improvement, just continuation. You take a moment to observe. Food here is not about choice, it is about availability. Whatever can be gathered, grown or preserved becomes the meal. There is no space for preference when survival is the only measure that matters. You step aside as another figure moves past you carrying a small sack. The fabric is worn, its surface marked by use. You wonder what is inside, but you do not ask. Questions feel unnecessary when the answers are often simple and rarely comforting. There is a quieter detail sometimes overlooked that some settlers initially expected supplies from England to arrive regularly and solve their difficulties. Standing here, that expectation feels distant, almost naive. The ocean that connects this place to England also separates it, and that distance seems to stretch further with each passing day. You look up at the walls again. From the inside, they appear less like a barrier and more like a frame. They define the space, but they do not remove the sense of vulnerability. You can still feel the outside pressing in, the unknown just beyond the wood. A faint breeze moves through the fort, slipping between gaps in the structures. It brings with it a slight shift in temperature, a brief relief from the stillness, but it does not last. You walk toward one of the corners. The angle of the fort becomes clearer here. The shape reveals itself more fully, and you can see how the walls meet, forming a point that looks outward. A place designed for watching, for guarding, for anticipating what might come. You pause there. For a moment, everything feels still. Then you notice it again. The quiet persistence of life within these walls. The small movements, the steady work, the way people adjust without speaking about it. There is a subtle, almost curious detail recorded in some lesser discussed accounts that early settlers sometimes mark time, not by days or weeks, but by events. The arrival of a ship, the loss of a harvest, the recovery from illness. Time becomes something measured by survival itself, rather than by a calendar. You can understand that now. The usual markers feel less important here. Morning, afternoon, evening. They exist, but they do not define the experience as much as what happens within them. You turn away from the wall and begin to walk again. Your steps feel more certain now, though. Not because the place has become easier. It is because you are beginning to understand its rhythm, the pace of it, the way everything moves just enough to continue but never more than necessary. You pass by another small structure. The door is closed, but you can hear something inside. A soft sound, not conversation, not movement, breathing perhaps, someone resting or recovering. It is hard to tell the difference here. You do not linger. There is a sense that privacy, even in its limited form, is respected in quiet ways, not through rules, but through shared understanding. You move back towards the centre of the fort. The fire you saw earlier burns a little lower now. The pot still sits above it, unchanged in its slow transformation. The person tending it has stepped away, leaving it to continue on its own. That seems to be a pattern here. Things are started, then allowed to proceed. Intervened only when necessary. Energy is used carefully. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. You take another breath. The air feels familiar now, not comfortable but known. And there is a difference between those two things. There is an ongoing debate among historians about how prepared the settlers truly were for life in Jamestown. Some suggest they underestimated the environment. Others believe they simply had no way to fully understand it before arriving. Standing here, the question feels less important than the reality. Prepared or not, they are here now, and so are you. You look around one more time. The fort does not feel welcoming. It does not offer ease, but it does offer something else, a structure, a place where effort can be contained, focused, repeated, and in a place like this that might be enough to begin with. You shift your weight and continue walking your steps steady, your pace unhurried. The day moves forward with you. You move on from the center of the fort, and almost without thinking, your attention returns to something far more immediate than walls or structure. Water, food, the quiet calculations that follow you with each step. You begin to understand that here survival is not an idea. It is a series of small decisions repeated throughout the day. The path toward the river is worn-marked by many feet that have taken the same route with the same purpose. You follow it slowly. The air shifts as you approach, carrying a faint coolness mixed with the scent of mud and vegetation. It should feel refreshing. Instead, it feels uncertain. When you reach the edge, you pause. The river stretches out in front of you, its surface smooth with only slight movement. It reflects the sky in a way that almost disguises what lies beneath. You crouch slightly and watch the water. It looks calm. It looks usable. But when you bring your hand close, you hesitate. There is a quiet awareness among historians that the James River near Jamestown often became brackish, especially during dry seasons when salt water pushed inland. You do not need a lecture to recognize the problem. Even before tasting it, you can sense that this water is not what your body expects. Someone beside you lowers a bucket. The rope creaks softly as it unwinds. The bucket disappears beneath the surface, then returns heavy and dripping. The person lifts it carefully as if each drop matters. You watch the water settle inside. It is not clear. It carries a faint cloudiness, a suggestion of things you cannot see. They do not hesitate. They turn and begin the walk back toward the fort. You remain for a moment longer. You dip your fingers in just enough to feel the temperature. It is neither warm nor cold, just present. You bring a small amount to your lips. The taste arrives slowly, slightly salty, slightly bitter. Not enough to reject outright, but enough to remind you that this is not clean. Still, it is what you have. You stand and follow the same path back, your steps measured. As you walk, you begin to notice how often people carry water. Buckets, small containers, anything that can hold it. It is a constant motion, a quiet cycle that never quite ends. Gather, carry, use, repeat. Back inside the fort, the reality of food begins to take shape in a similar way. You pass by a small group seated near a low fire. Their movements are slow, deliberate. One person breaks apart a piece of something dry and coarse. Another stirs a pot that seems to contain little more than liquid and fragments. The portions are small, carefully managed. A commonly accepted detail is that early Jamestown settlers struggled with severe food shortages, especially in the first years. Supplies from England were inconsistent and local food sources were not always understood or properly used. Standing here, that fact is no longer abstract. It is visible in every measured bite. You watch as someone lifts a spoon to their mouth. There is no rush, no sign of enjoyment, just a quiet acceptance. The act of eating becomes something practical, almost mechanical. It sustains, but it does not comfort. You move closer, drawn by the faint warmth of the fire. The smell reaches you. Thin broth, perhaps. A hint of grain. Something else you cannot quite identify. It is not unpleasant, but it lacks the richness you might expect from a meal. It feels incomplete, as if something important is missing. You sit down slowly, not intruding, but not entirely separate either. A small portion is offered to you without words. You take it. The texture is soft but uneven. Some parts dissolve quickly, others resist slightly. The flavour is faint, carrying just enough substance to remind you that it's food. You swallow, and your body responds with a quiet recognition. It is not satisfied, but it is supported. That seems to be the goal. There is a lesser-known detail that some early settlers attempted to rely on unfamiliar local plants and animals, without fully understanding how to prepare them safely. The results were not always successful. It is a reminder that even when food is available, knowledge matters just as much as supply. You finish what you have been given. The hunger does not disappear, but it softens slightly, enough to continue. Around you the rhythm continues. Someone stands and leaves, likely returning to work. Another remains seated, staring into the fire as if measuring something beyond the flames. There is little conversation. Words are used sparingly, saved for when they are necessary. You notice how energy is managed here. Every movement is considered. Every action serves a purpose. There is no excess, no wasted effort. Even rest is taken carefully, as if it must be earned in small portions. You rise and begin to walk again. The fort feels different now, not because it has changed, but because your understanding has. You are no longer just observing. You're beginning to feel the patterns that hold this place together. Water, food, work, each one connect to the others in ways that are not always obvious, but always present. You pass by the storehouse again. This time you look more closely. The barrels are still there, but they seem fewer than before. Or perhaps you're simply more aware of their importance now. Each container represents time, days perhaps. Maybe less. There is no guarantee of replenishment. You step back and continue on. A faint breeze moves through the fort, carrying with it the distant scent of the river. It blends with the smoke, the earth, the lingering traces of food. The air becomes something layered, something that tells you where you are without needing to see it. You pause for a moment. There is a question that lingers in your mind, though it does not fully form. How long can this continue? How long can a place survive on such thin margins? Historians still argue whether the early struggles of Jamestown were primarily due to environmental challenges or poor planning by the settlers themselves. As you stand here, the answer feels less important than the experience, because whatever the cause, the result is the same: uncertainty. You take a slow breath. The day continues not with dramatic shifts, but with steady repetition. Tasks begin and end, movements overlap, time passes though it does not announce itself clearly. You begin to understand that survival here is not a single event. It is a process, one that requires patience, attention, and a willingness to continue even when the outcome is unclear. You take a step forward, then another. The hunger remains, but it no longer dominates your thoughts. The water is still questionable, but it has become part of your routine. The discomfort has not disappeared, but it has settled into the background. You move through the fort with a quiet awareness. Every action matters, every resource counts, and every day that passes is something earned, not given. You continue walking, your pace steady, your breath calm. The rhythm holds. For now, that is enough. You step beyond the more crowded center of the fort, and almost immediately the air begins to change. It feels heavier here, thicker in a way that settles slowly onto your skin. You notice it first along your neck, then your arms, a faint layer of moisture that does not quite evaporate. The heat is not sharp. It does not strike you all at once. Instead, it lingers persistent and patient, as if it has all the time in the world. You take a breath. The air carries the scent of standing water mixed with vegetation that grows close to the ground and does not move much, even when the breeze passes through. It is a quiet smell, but constant. You begin to understand that freshness is not something this place offers easily. A detail often noted in records from the early colony is that Jamestown was built near marshy land, which created ideal conditions for mosquitoes. That small fact begins to take shape around you in a very immediate way. You hear them before you fully notice them. A faint high sound, not loud, not alarming, just present. Then one lands on your wrist. You brush it away without thinking. Another follows, then another. The pattern builds not into chaos, but into persistence. You realize quickly that this is not something you can avoid entirely, only manage. You continue walking, your movements slightly more deliberate now. There is a shallow stretch of land nearby where the ground dips just enough to hold water. It does not flow, it rests. The surface reflects light in a dull way, broken by small ripples that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. You do not step closer. There is an instinct, quiet but clear, that tells you to keep your distance. Some lesser discussed observations from early accounts suggest that settlers often underestimated how deeply the environment would affect their health. The land here is not aggressive. It does not attack directly. Instead, it wears you down slowly in ways that are easy to overlook at first. You feel it now, not as illness, not yet, but as a kind of pressure. A constant demand on your body to adjust, to adapt, to endure. You move back towards the edge of the fort where the structures thin slightly and the outside world feels closer again. The light is brighter here, but it does not feel lighter. The heat follows you, settling again as soon as you stop. Nearby, someone sits on a low surface, their posture slightly slumped. They are not resting in a comfortable way, more like pausing because there is no other option. Their breathing is slow measured, as if even that requires attention. You watch for a moment. There is a stillness in them that feels different from simple fatigue. You move on. Illness here does not always announce itself clearly. It begins quietly, a slight weakness, a persistent discomfort. Then over time it grows, without warning, without pattern that you can easily follow. A widely acknowledged reality is that many early Jamestown settlers suffered from diseases such as dysentery and malaria fueled by poor water and the surrounding environment. The words themselves sound clinical, distant, but here they are anything but distant. You pass another figure leaning against a wall. Their eyes are half closed, their focus somewhere inward. They shift slightly as you walk by, but not enough to fully acknowledge you. Their presence feels fragile, as if they are holding themselves together through effort alone. You lower your gaze and continue. There is a quiet understanding that spreads through the settlement, not spoken but shared. People notice, they observe, but they do not dwell on it for long. There is always something else to do, something else that requires attention. You move toward a patch of shade cast by one of the larger structures. The relief is immediate, though small. The temperature drops just enough to feel different. You stand there for a moment, allowing your body to settle. Your breathing slows. The sounds around you soften again. The distant hum of insects, the occasional movement of someone passing by, the quiet crackle of a fire somewhere out of sight. There is a curious note in some personal writings from the time that settlers often described the Virginia climate as both beautiful and unforgiving. That contrast lingers in your mind as you stand here, because the sky above remains open and calm. The light falls gently across the land, and yet everything beneath it carries a subtle strain. You step out of the shade. The heat returns as expected. You begin to adjust your pace without the thinking. Slower, more measured. Each movement becomes slightly more deliberate, as if your body is learning how to exist here with less effort. That seems to be the pattern. Not resistance, adjustment. You pass by a small group working near the edge of the fort. Their movements are steady, though not fast. Tools rise and fall in a rhythm that feels practiced, even if it is still new. There is little conversation, just the sound of work being done. You notice how often people pause, not for long, just enough to gather themselves before continuing. These small pauses are not signs of weakness. They are part of the process, a way of sustaining effort over time. You continue walking. The ground shifts slightly beneath your feet as you move from one area to another. Firmer here, softer there. Each step requires a small adjustment, a subtle awareness that you cannot quite turn off. There is a thought that forms quietly in your mind. This place does not demand strength in a single moment. It asks for endurance, for the ability to continue even when each part of the day takes a little more than you expected. A question lingers among scholars about whether the high mortality in early Jamestown could have been reduced with better site selection or preparation. Standing here, that question feels distant, because what matters now is not what could have been done differently, but what must be done next. You take another breath. The air feels the same as before, heavy but familiar now. You look around once more. The fort, the river beyond, the lowland that holds water and insects and quiet danger. It all blends together into a single experience. Not separate challenges, but one continuous environment that shapes everything you do. You begin to move again, your step steady, your pace calm. There is no clear end to the day ahead. No moment when everything will suddenly become easier. Only this, the slow, persistent act of living within it. You continue forward, and the heat follows patient as ever. You move back towards the center of activity, and what once felt like scattered effort now begins to reveal a kind of order. It is not neat and it is not comfortable, but it exists. The colony holds itself together through expectation routine and a quiet pressure that seems to follow everyone. A voice calls out nearby, not loudly but firmly enough to be heard. You turn slightly and see a man standing with a posture that suggests authority. His clothing is not dramatically different from the others, yet it is cleaner, more structured. He holds himself in a way that implies he is used to being listened to. You slow your steps. Around him, a small group gathers, not eagerly but without resistance. They stand with a certain stillness waiting. There is a commonly recognised feature of early Jamestown life that the colony operated under strict rules often enforced through a system known as the laws divine, moral and martial. Discipline was not optional here. It was considered necessary for survival. You watch as instructions are given. The words are direct, clear. There is no space for interpretation. Tasks are assigned. Movements are directed. Time is divided into portions that must be used carefully. No one interrupts. No one questions, at least not openly. You begin to notice something else. The difference between people, not just in clothing or posture, but in expectation. Others give orders, others receive them. The line between the two is not always sharp, but it is there shaping how each person moves through the day. You step aside as the group begins to disperse. Each person moves toward their assigned task with a pace that is neither fast nor slow, just steady. As if they have learned that resistance costs more energy than compliance. You follow at a distance. A man begins to work with a tool that looks heavy and unfamiliar. His movements are careful but not entirely confident. There is effort in each motion, a slight hesitation that suggests this is not something he has done for long. A quieter historical observation often mentioned is that many early settlers came from backgrounds that did not prepare them for manual labour. Gentlemen, craftsmen, individuals accustomed to different kinds of work. Here those distinctions blur. Survival does not consider previous status. You watch as the man pauses, adjusts his grip and continues. There is no one correcting him immediately, no guidance offered, just the expectation that he will learn by doing or not. You move on. Nearby, another group works together more fluidly. Their movements align, tools rising and falling in a shared rhythm. There is a sense of familiarity there. Perhaps they have adapted more quickly, or perhaps their previous lives prepared them better. You notice the difference. Not everyone struggles in the same way. You walk past a narrow space between buildings and catch a brief exchange of words. Low, quick, a complaint perhaps. It is difficult to tell. The tone carries a hint of frustration, but it fades as quickly as it appears. There is little room here for extended disagreement. The structure of the colony presses gently but constantly on everyone within it, not through loud force, but through repetition. Rules followed day after day begin to feel like part of the environment itself. You step into a slightly more open area. Here the activity shifts, less building, more organisation. Supplies being moved, tools arranged, tasks that support the others less visible but just as necessary. A person nearby counts something quietly, their lips moving without sound. You see their hands sorting small items into groups. Precision matters here, even when the items themselves seem simple. There is a small lesser-known detail that punishments in early Jamestown could be severe even for minor offences. Not always carried out, but always present as a possibility. It creates a subtle tension, one that you can feel even when nothing is happening. You glance around. There are no visible signs of punishment at this moment. No raised voices, no confrontation, and yet the awareness remains. It shapes behaviour quietly, encouraging order through the understanding of consequence. You continue walking. Your steps feel more integrated into the space now. You're no longer just observing from the outside, you're moving within the same patterns, adjusting your pace to match the flow around you. A tool is handed from one person to another. No words are exchanged, just a brief look, a small nod. The task continues without interruption. It is a simple moment, but it carries a kind of efficiency that feels practiced. You begin to see how this place functions, not through comfort, not through ease, but through structure. Each person holds a small part of it. Each action connects to another. When one part falters, the others must adjust. You pass by a doorway where someone sits alone. Their posture is upright but still. Not resting, not working, simply waiting. There is a different quality to their presence, less urgent, more hebsion. You wonder briefly about their role, but the thought does not stay long. In a place like this, roles shift, responsibilities overlap. What matters most is not the title but the contribution. You move on. There is a question that appears quietly in your mind. How long can this balance hold? It is not asked out loud. It does not need to be. The answer is uncertain, and everyone seems to know that without saying it. Some historians continue to examine whether strict discipline saved the colony from collapse or simply delayed deeper problems. Standing here, the distinction feels less important, because in this moment the system works. Not perfectly, but enough. You take a slow breath. The air carries the same mix of scents, smoke, earth, human effort. It has become familiar in a way that no longer demands attention. You look around once more, the people, the movement, the quiet structure that holds it all together. It is not stable in the way you might hope, but it is functioning, and for now that is what matters. You shift your weight and continue forward your steps, steady, your pace aligned with the rhythm around you. The day carries on, and so do you. You drift closer to the edge of the settlement again, where the fort no longer feels like the centre of everything. The walls remain behind you, but your attention moves outward toward the land beyond. It stretches quietly, not empty, but full in a way that is harder to read. The trees stand at a distance, their shapes layered in soft green and shadow. The ground between you and them is uneven, broken by patches of grass and low growth. There is no clear boundary marked, no sign that tells you where one world ends and another begins. And yet you feel it. You slow your steps. There is a presence here that is different from the one inside the fort. Less contained, less predictable. The air feels the same warm and heavy, but the silence carries a different weight. It is not shaped by walls or routine. It exists on its own terms. A careful historical understanding tells us that the land surrounding Jamestown was part of the Powhatan Confederacy, a network of indigenous communities led by Chief Powhatan. This was not empty land waiting to be used. It was already lived in, understood and shaped by people who knew it far better than those who had just arrived. You stand still for a moment, listening. There are sounds here, but they are subtle. Leaves shifting slightly. A distant movement that you cannot quite place. It is not the layered noise of the fort, and it is quieter but not silent. You become aware of your own presence more clearly. The way your feet press into the ground, the way your breathing moves the air around you. Everything feels slightly more noticeable, as if this space requires a different kind of attention. You take a cautious step forward, then another. There is no path laid out for you, but there are signs of movement, faint impressions in the ground, broken stems, small changes that suggest others have passed through here before, even if not recently. A figure appears at the edge of your vision. You stop. They're not close, but not distant either. Their posture is upright, still watching. There is no sudden movement, no sign of alarm, just awareness. You do not approach. They do not either. For a moment, the space between you holds everything. Distance, curiosity, uncertainty. There is a commonly accepted understanding that early interactions between the English settlers and the Powhatan people were marked by both cooperation and tension. Trade existed, communication happened, but so did misunderstanding shaped by different expectations and ways of seeing the world. You can feel that complexity in this moment. Neither side moves, neither side speaks, and yet something passes between you. Not a message, not an agreement, just recognition. After a time that feels longer than it is, the figure turns slightly and moves away, their steps quiet, almost blending into the land itself. Within moments they are no longer visible. You remain where you are. The stillness returns, but it is not the same as before. It carries the memory of that brief encounter, a reminder that this place is shared even if not fully understood. You turn slowly and begin to walk back toward the fort. Your steps feel more deliberate now. There is a subtle shift in your awareness. The settlement is no longer just a place you are trying to understand. It is part of a larger environment, one that includes people who are not part of the fort's routines, but are deeply connected to the land itself. A quieter observation sometimes noted in accounts is that the English often relied on trade with the Powhatan for food, especially during periods when their own supplies were low. That reliance was not always openly acknowledged, but it was real. You pass the edge of the fort again. The wooden walls come back into view, their shape familiar now. The sounds inside reach you before you fully step back in. Voices, movement, the steady rhythm of work. You enter. The difference is immediate. The air feels contained again, the sounds more structured, the space more defined. You realise how much the fort shapes not only activity but perception itself. Inside, everything has a place. Outside, everything is less certain. You walk along the inner edge of the wall, your hand briefly brushing against the wood. It feels rough, warm from the sun, solid but not permanent. There is a small group gathered nearby, speaking in low tones. You catch fragments of their conversation. Trade, food, timing. The words suggest planning, but also hesitation. Nothing seems entirely secure. You move past them. There is a sense that knowledge here is incomplete. Not just about the land, but about the people who inhabit it beyond the fort. Each interaction adds a small piece, but never the full picture. You step into a quieter space. For a moment you allow yourself to pause. The memory of the figure outside lingers. Not as a threat, not as reassurance, just as a reminder that this place is not isolated, even if it sometimes feels that way. A thoughtful question continues to appear in historical discussions about whether early misunderstandings between the English and the Powhatan could have been reduced with better communication or patience. As you stand here, the question feels open, unanswered, because understanding requires time, and time here is uncertain. You take a slow breath. The air inside the fort feels familiar again. The scents, the sounds, the steady presence of people moving through their tasks. You begin to walk once more. Your steps carry a new layer of awareness. This place is not alone. It exists within something larger, something that cannot be fully controlled or defined by the walls that surround it. You continue forward, your pace calm, your thoughts quiet. The day unfolds, and beyond the fort the land remains watching in its own silent way. You notice the light changing first. It happens slowly, almost gently, as the day fades into something dimmer, cooler in colour, but not in feeling. The air does not lose its weight, and the ground beneath you still holds the same quiet dampness. Yet something shifts. The sense of time becomes more noticeable when the light begins to leave. You move closer to the firelight near the centre of the fort. It burns low, its glow steady but modest, casting soft shadows that stretch and pull along the wooden walls. People gather nearby, not in large groups, but in small clusters. Their movements are slower now, more contained. The energy of the day has thinned. A well-established historical record tells us that the winter of 1609 to 1610 became known as the Starving Time, a period when food supplies collapsed and survival turned into a daily uncertainty. As you settle into the dimming light, you begin to feel the edge of that reality, not as a dramatic moment, but as something that creeps in quietly. You sit down. The ground is firm enough here, though, still uneven. You adjust slightly, finding a position that allows you to rest without fully relaxing. Around you the sounds soften, voices lower, movement slow. Someone beside you exhales deeply. It is not a sigh of relief, more like a release of what little strength remains at the end of the day. You hear another breath, then another, each one carrying a similar weight. Food is brought out, small portions again, smaller than before. You watch as it is divided carefully, each share measured, with a tension that borders on ritual. No one reaches early, no one takes more than they are given. The act itself feels controlled, deliberate. You receive your portion. It is thinner now, less substance. The flavour barely registers, more memory than presence. You eat slowly, not to enjoy it, but to make it last, even if only for a few extra moments. There is a quieter note found in some accounts, that during this harsh period settlers resorted to eating whatever they could find, including items they would never have considered before. It is a detail that sits heavily, not because it is shocking, but because it feels entirely possible when you look around you now. You lower your No one speaks of it directly. There is no need. The understanding is shared. You finish your portion and set your hands in your lap, feeling the slight emptiness that remains. It does not feel like hunger in the sharp sense. More like a steady absence, something that lingers without urgency but never quite leaves. The fire crackles softly. Its warmth reaches you, but only just. Enough to notice, not enough to rely on. You pull your arms closer to your body. The air has cooled slightly, though the dampness remains. It settles into your clothing, into your skin, creating a quiet discomfort that does not ask for attention, but stays with you nonetheless. A figure across from you shifts. Their movements are slower than earlier in the day. Each adjustment seems to take effort, as if even small actions require careful consideration. You watch as they bring their hands together, rubbing them gently, perhaps to create warmth, perhaps simply to feel something steady. There is a reflection often mentioned in historical discussions that the starving time reduced the population of Jamestown dramatically, with many settlers not surviving the winter. Numbers are one way to understand it, but here in this moment it is not numbers you notice, it is the space, the gaps between people, the quiet where more voices might have been. You look around. The clusters are smaller now, the movements fewer. It is not something you would notice immediately unless you were paying attention. You are. A small sound breaks the stillness. A cough, then another. They do not echo. They settle quickly into the space absorbed by the quiet. But they leave something behind, a reminder of how fragile everything feels. You shift slightly, adjusting your position again. Your body feels heavier now, not from rest, but from the accumulation of the day. The effort of moving, of thinking, of adapting. It all gathers in small ways. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to pause. The sounds continue around you, even without sight. The fire, the low voices, the occasional movement. They form a pattern that feels almost steady, even as everything else remains uncertain. You open your eyes again. The light has faded further. The edges of the fort blur, slightly softened by shadow. The world becomes smaller, defined by the reach of the fire and the closeness of those around you. A less frequently highlighted detail is that some settlers attempted to leave Jamestown during this time, seeking survival elsewhere, though not all succeeded. The thought lingers briefly in your mind. The idea of leaving, of stepping beyond the walls again. You do not move. There is no clear direction that promises safety. You remain where you are. A quiet question appears, one that has followed this place from the beginning. Could this have been avoided? Could different choices have changed what you're experiencing now? Many researchers continue to explore whether leadership decisions, environmental conditions, or simple misfortune played the largest role in this suffering. The answer does not arrive here by the fire in the dim light. What remains is the present. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, though still heavy. You pull your arms closer again, conserving warmth in the simplest way you can. Around you, people begin to settle. Some lean back against the wooden walls. Others remain seated, their posture upright, but relaxed in a way that suggests exhaustion rather than comfort. There is no clear signal that the day has ended. It simply fades into stillness. You allow yourself to follow that rhythm. Your breathing slows, your thoughts quiet. The hunger remains, but it no longer demands attention in the same way. It becomes part of the background, like the air, like the ground beneath you. You look into the fire one last time. The flames move gently, their light steady, their presence constant. They do not promise anything. They simply exist. You shift slightly, finding a position that allows you to rest without fully letting go. The night settles around you, and within it you remain, still, present, continuing. Morning returns in a quiet, almost hesitant way. You do not wake suddenly. There is no sharp break between night and day. Instead, the light begins to gather slowly, soft at first, touching the edges of the fort, slipping between the gaps in the wood. Your eyes open, gradually adjusting to a world that looks much the same as before, yet feels slightly altered. The fire from the night has dimmed to a faint glow. A thin thread of smoke rises, barely visible. Around you, people begin to move again, not with urgency, but with a kind of practiced acceptance. You sit up. Your body feels stiff, the ground having offered support but not comfort. You stretch slightly, careful not to waste energy, and take a slow breath. The air is cooler now, though the dampness remains. It clings lightly, as it always does. There is no announcement that the day has begun. It simply continues. A firmly grounded historical detail is that Jamestown suffered repeated destruction and hardship in its early years, including fires that damaged much of the settlement. Rebuilding was not a single event, but a repeated necessity. You begin to sense that now, not through ruins in front of you, but through the way everything feels temporary. You stand nearby. Someone is already at work adjusting a section of wall where the wood has shifted slightly. Their movements are slow but deliberate, each action measured to conserve effort while still making progress. You walk closer. The wood they handle is rough, uneven, and not perfectly fitted. You can see where previous repairs were made, where one piece overlaps another, where small gaps have been filled in with whatever was available. The structure holds, but not without constant attention. You reach out and touch the surface. It feels solid enough, yet you can sense its fragility. Not in the way it might collapse immediately, but in the way it depends on care to remain standing. A quieter observation noted in some accounts is that early settlers often reused materials from damaged structures, salvaging what they could rather than starting fresh. It makes sense here. Nothing is wasted if it can still serve a purpose. You move on. The fort feels slightly different in the morning light. The shadows are softer, the edges clearer. What looked uncertain in the dim glow of fire now reveals itself more plainly. The uneven lines, the worn surfaces, the signs of repair layered over time. You pass a small group working together. They lift a beam, slowly adjusting its position with care. Their movements are not synchronized in a perfect way, but they are coordinated enough to achieve the task. There is a quiet communication between them, expressed through glances and small gestures rather than words. You pause for a moment to watch. The effort is visible, not dramatic, but steady. Each movement adds something. Each adjustment brings the structure a little closer to holding. You step aside as they shift the beam into place. A soft thud marks the moment it settles. Not final, but sufficient for now. You continue walking. The ground beneath your feet feels slightly firmer than it did the day before. Perhaps it has dried a little, or perhaps you have simply grown more accustomed to its texture. Either way, your steps feel more certain. There is a subtle change in the atmosphere, not in temperature or scent, but in energy. It is not stronger, but it is present in a different way. The work of rebuilding carries a quiet determination, not hopeful in a brazos or bright sense, but steady in a way that suggests continuation. You move toward the edge of the fort again. The walls rise beside you, marked by repairs that blend into the original construction. It is difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. Everything becomes part of the same structure over time. You look outward. The land beyond remains unchanged, still, watchful. It does not react to what happens inside the fort, it simply exists alongside it. You turn back. Inside, the movement continues. Someone carries a bundle of smaller wood pieces likely to be used for further repairs. Another person inspects a section of roofing, adjusting it slightly to improve its fit. These are not grand actions. They are small, necessary ones. A lesser-known detail is that despite repeated hardships, the settlers did not abandon Jamestown entirely, even when conditions became severe. The decision to remain was not always logical in a simple sense, but it was consistent. You begin to understand that. Leaving would require certainty. Staying requires endurance. You walk through the center of the fort once more. The fire has been revived, its flames slightly stronger now. A pot rests above it again, beginning the slow process of preparing what little food is available. The cycle continues unchanged. You pass by the storehouse. Its contents remain limited, but you notice that items have been rearranged, organized more carefully, counted perhaps. There is a sense that even small improvements in order can make a difference. You step into a quieter space. For a moment you allow yourself to pause. The sounds of work continue around you, steady and unbroken. They form a kind of background, a constant presence that does not demand attention but never disappears. You take a slow breath. The air feels familiar now, the sense, the weight, the subtle shifts. You no longer react to them as strongly. They have become part of your experience, integrated into the way you move and think. There is a question that lingers quietly. Is this progress? Not in the sense of growth or expansion, but in the sense of continuation. Some scholars continue to examine whether Jamestown survival depended more on persistence than on planning. Standing here, that idea feels close to the truth. Because what you see is not perfection. It is not even stability in a complete sense. It is effort, repeated, sustained. You open your eyes fully and look around once more. The fort stands, not because it was built once, but because it is rebuilt again and again. You shift your weight and begin to walk. Your steps feel steady. The day unfolds with the same quiet rhythm, and within it you continue. You notice the change not in the buildings, but in the people. It is subtle at first, a different tone in conversation, a slight shift in posture, movements that carry a hint of something beyond survival. As you walk through the fort, the rhythm remains steady, but there is a new layer woven into it, something quieter, more personal. You pass by a doorway where voices linger longer than before. Not instructions, not complaints, something softer. You slow your steps. Inside, two figures sit close to one another, their movements unhurried. One adjusts a piece of fabric, smoothing it carefully, while the other watches with a kind of quiet attention that feels different from the usual patterns of work. There is no urgency here, just presence. You move on. A widely accepted development in Jamestown's early years was the arrival of women in greater numbers, particularly after 1619, which helped establish more stable households. That shift begins to take shape around you, not as an event, but as a gradual change in how life is organized. You begin to see it in small details. Clothing that is mended with more care, spaces that feel slightly more ordered, objects placed with intention rather than necessity alone. You walk past a small structure where a faint sound reaches you. Not work, not instruction, a softer rhythm, someone speaking in a low, steady voice, perhaps telling a story, perhaps simply filling the quiet. You pause at the edge. Inside, a small group sits together. Their posture is relaxed in a way that feels unfamiliar in this place. One person gestures lightly as they speak, their hands moving solely, not out of urgency, but expression. You do not enter. The moment feels contained, not meant to be interrupted. You step back and continue. There is a quieter detail sometimes mentioned that the Virginia Company encouraged marriages in the colony, even arranging for women to travel to Jamestown with the expectation of forming households. It was not just about companionship, it was about stability. You begin to understand what that means. Stability here is not comfort. It is continuity. You walk toward an area where small items are laid out on a flat surface. Pieces of cloth, a simple tool, a small container. They are arranged carefully, not scattered. Someone kneels nearby, working with slow precision, repairing something that has already been used many times. You watch for a moment. The act is quiet, almost meditative. Each movement is deliberate, focused, as if the task itself offers a kind of calm within the larger uncertainty. You notice how different this feels from the heavier labour elsewhere. It is still work, but it carries a different weight. You move on. Nearby, two people walk together, their steps aligned. They speak softly, their voices low enough that you cannot catch the words, but the tone suggests familiarity. Not the brief exchanges of necessity, but something more sustained. You realize that relationships here are beginning to take shape. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. A thoughtful observation found in some accounts is that the formation of families in Jamestown helped anchor the colony in ways that simple labour could not. It created reasons to stay, to build, to endure beyond the immediate moment. You feel that now, in the way people linger slightly longer in conversation, in the way spaces are used with more care, in the way the fort, while still harsh, begins to hold something softer within it. You walk past the fire. It burns as it always does, steady and practical. But now there are more people gathered near it, not just for warmth or food, but for presence. They sit closer, their movements less guarded. You take a seat at the edge. The ground feels the same beneath you, firm and uneven. The air carries the same mix of scents. smoke, earth, effort, yet the atmosphere feels slightly different. Someone passes a small object to another, a piece of food perhaps, or something else of value. The exchange is quiet, almost unnoticed, but it carries meaning. It is not just about survival, it is about sharing. You watch as a brief smile appears. It fades quickly, but it is there. That alone feels significant. You shift slightly, adjusting your position. Your body still carries the weight of the environment, the fatigue, the constant need to adapt. But there is a moment, brief and quiet, where that weight feels less immediate. You look around. The fort remains unchanged in its structure. The walls, the buildings, the ground beneath ye. None of it has softened, but the life within it is beginning to shift. A question often explored by historians is whether Jamestown could have survived without this transition toward family life and domestic stability. As you sit here, the answer feels closer, because survival alone sustains the body. But something more is needed to sustain the will to continue. You rise slowly. The fire continues to burn behind you. You walk through the fort once more. The movements of people feel slightly more connected now. Not just individual efforts, but small networks forming. Shared tasks, shared spaces, shared moments. You pass by the doorway again. The voices inside are still there, soft and steady. The same rhythm as before. It has not changed, but it feels more familiar now. You continue walking. Your steps are calm, your pace unhurried. The day moves forward as it always does. Work continues. Challenges remain. Nothing has become easier, and yet something has shifted. Not in the land, not in the structure, but in the quiet spaces between people. You move through those spaces aware of them now, and as you do, the fort feels just slightly less like a place you endure, and slightly more like a place that is beginning to hold you. You notice the sound before anything else. It is faint at first, carried unevenly through the air, rising and falling, as if uncertain whether it should continue. A bell. Not loud, not commanding, but present enough to draw attention. It does not rush you. It invites you gently into a shared moment. You turn toward it. The source is a small structure, modest in size, its form simple compared to the rest of the fort. It does not stand apart in grandeur. It blends in, almost easily overlooked unless you are listening for it. You move closer. People begin to gather, not quickly, not in tight formation, but steadily. Their steps are measured, their expressions calm. There is no visible resistance, yet no outward enthusiasm either. It feels like something expected, something folded into the rhythm of the day. A well-documented aspect of early Jamestown life is that religion played a central role, with regular Anglican services considered an essential part of maintaining order and morale. As you approach, that role becomes clearer not through ceremony alone, but through repetition. You step inside. The space is dim lit softly by what little light filters through. The air feels still, carrying a faint mixture of wood and something older, something settled. People take their places, standing or sitting where they can, their movements quiet. You find a place near the back. The floor beneath you is firm, though uneven in places. You adjust your stance slightly, settling into stillness. A voice begins. It is steady measured, neither loud nor soft. The words flow in a familiar pattern, one that has been repeated many times before. You listen not necessarily to understand every phrase, but to follow the rhythm. There is comfort in that rhythm, not because it changes anything around you, but because it offers something consistent. You glance around. Faces are calm, though not entirely at ease. Some eyes are focused forward. Others drift slightly, as if the mind moves elsewhere while the body remains present. There is a quieter observation sometimes mentioned in personal accounts that for many settlers, religious practice was less about deep devotion and more about structure, a way to impose order on a life that often felt unpredictable. That idea lingers as you stand here. The service continues. The words rise and fall, carried by the same steady voice. There are moments of response, brief and unified, then silence again. Each part flows into the next without interruption. You notice how still everything becomes. Outside the fort continues. Work does not stop entirely, but here within these walls, time feels slightly different, slower, contained. You take a slow breath. The air feels unchanged, yet the atmosphere is quieter, more focused. The sounds of movement fade, replaced by the cadence of speech and the soft shifting of feet. A small detail often overlooked is that some settlers struggled privately with doubt even as public worship remained regular and expected. It is not something you can see directly, but you sense it in the way some people stand, their posture steady, yet their gaze distant. You lower your eyes. The floor shows signs of wear, small marks where feet have stood again and again. Repetition leaves its trace here, just as it does everywhere else. You listen. The words continue steady and unbroken. You do not question them aloud. No one does. There is a shared understanding that this space, this moment, serves a purpose beyond explanation. Whether that purpose is belief, comfort, or simply routine may differ from one person to another. You shift your weight slightly. Your body adjusts, finding balance in stillness. The act of standing becomes its own quiet effort, one that requires attention in small ways. The voice slows, then pauses. A moment of silence follows. It is not empty. It holds everything that has been spoken, everything that remains unspoken. You feel it settle around you, soft but present. Then the voice resumes. The rhythm returns familiar as before. You begin to notice how this fits into the larger pattern of the day. Work. Pause. Work again. Moments like this do not remove the difficulties of life here. They do not change the air, the water, the hunger, but they create a space where those things are set aside, even if only briefly. You look up. The light has shifted, slightly filtering through in a different way. Time has passed, though it is difficult to say how much. A question continues to appear in historical discussions about whether religion in Jamestown functioned more as a tool of governance or as a genuine source of comfort. Standing here, the answer does not settle clearly. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it changes from one person to another. The service begins to draw toward its end. The voice softens the words, slowing, then coming to a close. There is no dramatic finish, just a quiet conclusion that feels consistent with everything that came before. People begin to move, not all at once. Gradually, a shift here, a step there. The stillness breaks gently without disruption. You step back, allowing others to pass. The air outside feels the same as before when you emerge. The heat, the dampness, the layered scents, nothing has changed. And yet something feels slightly different. Not in the environment, but in you. A small adjustment, a subtle shift in awareness. You walk away from the structure, your steps steady. The sounds of the fort return, work resumes, voices rise again though still measured. The moment has passed, but its rhythm lingers. You continue forward, moving once more into the steady flow of the day. The balance holds. For now, you begin to notice it in the smell before you see it. It drifts lightly through the air, different from smoke, different from damp earth. Sharper, almost sweet, with a faint dryness that settles at the back of your throat. You follow it without thinking, your steps slow, your attention narrowing. The source reveals itself in small patches just beyond the more crowded areas. Rows of plants. Low at first glance, their leaves broad and slightly textured, catching the light in a muted green. They do not look remarkable. Not at first, but the way people move around them tells you otherwise. You step closer. The ground here feels different, more disturbed. Turned over again and again, shaped by repeated work. It is not smooth, but it is intentional. Every space between the plants has been measured, not with tools you can see, but with experience. A widely recognized turning point in Jamestown's history was the successful cultivation of tobacco by John Rolfe in the early 1610s, which transformed the colony's economy. That transformation begins to make sense here, not as an idea, but as something rooted in the soil beneath your feet. You watch as someone kneels beside one of the plants. Their hands move, carefully adjusting the soil, checking the leaves, removing something small that you cannot quite see. Each motion is slow, deliberate, as if the plant requires attention that cannot be rushed. You crouch slightly, bringing your view closer. The leaves are larger than you expected, their surface soft but firm. They hold the light in a way that suggests they are important, though they do not reveal why immediately. You reach out but stop just before touching. There is a sense that this is not something to handle casually. You stand again. Nearby, another person carries a bundle of cut leaves, their arms steady despite the weight. The leaves hang loosely, their edges curling slightly. The smell is stronger now, more distinct. It lingers. you begin to understand that this plant is different from the others you have seen. It is not just grown, it is valued. There is a lesser-known detail that early English settlers initially struggled to produce tobacco that would appeal to European markets as native varieties were considered too harsh. The success came when sweeter strains were introduced and cultivated with care. You can see that care now. Every movement around these plants carries intention. Nothing is done quickly. Nothing is done without attention. You walk along the edge of the rows. The pattern repeats. Plant, space, or it creates a rhythm not unlike the movements within the fort, but quieter, more grounded. You notice how the work here differs from other tasks. It is still demanding, still constant, but it carries a different focus. There is patience in it. You pause as someone stands nearby examining a leaf. They tilt it slightly, turning it toward the light as if searching for something only they can see. After a moment, they nod to themselves and move on. No words are spoken. The understanding seems internal, learned through repetition rather than instruction. You continue walking. The air feels slightly drier here, though the heat remains. The scent of tobacco blends with everything else, creating a new layer that you begin to associate with this part of the colony. You pass a structure where leaves are hung. Inside, the light is dimmer, filtered through the layers of drying plants. They hang in rows, suspended carefully, each one placed with purpose. The space smells stronger here, the scent deeper, more concentrated. You step inside. The air is still, almost heavy with it. You move slowly, aware that even small disturbances might matter. The leaves shift slightly as you pass their edges, brushing against one another with a soft, dry sound. It is not loud, but it fills the space in a quiet way. You look up. The rows extend above you, creating a ceiling of green and brown. It feels enclosed but not confined. More like being surrounded by something that is in the process of becoming something else. There is a thoughtful observation often made that tobacco quickly became the economic lifeline of Jamestown, shaping not only trade but daily life itself. Standing here, that influence feels tangible. This is not just a crop, it is direction. You step back outside. The light feels brighter after the dim interior. You blink slightly, adjusting, then begin to walk again. People move with purpose around you, carrying, checking, preparing. Each action connects to the next. You begin to see how this plant changes everything. It gives the colony something to focus on beyond immediate survival, something to invest in, something that connects this place to a world far beyond the river. A question often raised by historians is whether Jamestown would have survived without tobacco's success. As you move through the rows, the answer feels close. Because this work, this careful attention creates more than just a harvest. It creates possibility. You pause once more, looking out over the plants. They do not look like much from a distance. Simple, unremarkable, and yet everything around them suggests otherwise. You take a slow breath. The scent lingers, settling into your awareness. You turn and begin to walk back toward the fort. Your steps feel steady. The rhythm of the column continues, but now you understand that it has shifted. Not entire. Not completely, but enough. The work is still hard. The challenges remain. But now there is something else woven into it. A purpose that extends beyond the next meal. You move forward, carrying that awareness with you. And as you do, the air itself seems to hold a new meaning. Quiet, persistent, and full of what might come next. You return to the fields with a different awareness now. What once seemed like simple rows of plants begins to reveal layers of work hidden within each stage. You move more slowly this time, noticing details you might have missed before. The ground carries faint impressions of repeated footsteps. The plants themselves show subtle differences, some leaves broader, others slightly curled, each at a different point in its quiet cycle. You step between the rows carefully. The soil feels softer here, shaped by the constant tending. Your feet sink just enough to remind you that this place is work not left alone. You adjust your balance without thinking, your body beginning to learn the rhythm of the land. A well-established fact is that cultivating tobacco required careful attention at every stage, from planting seeds in protected beds to transplanting them into fields and managing their growth over time. That process begins to unfold in front of you, not as a sequence of instructions, but as a continuous flow of effort. You kneel beside a plant, Up close, the leaves appear thicker than you expected, their surface slightly textured, almost velvety. You notice small imperfections, tiny marks, edges that are not entirely smooth. Each one tells a quiet story of growth, of weather, of handling. You reach out this time. Your fingers brush the surface lightly. It is softer than it looks. You withdraw your hand and stand again. Nearby, someone works with steady focus, removing smaller shoots that grow between the main leaves. Their movements are precise, practiced. Each removal is deliberate, shaping the plant in a way that is not immediately obvious but clearly important. You watch for a moment. The task repeats, over and over. There is no variation in the motion, only consistency. A lesser noted detail is that this process, sometimes called topping and suckering, was essential to producing stronger, more desirable tobacco leaves. Without it, the plant would grow differently, less suited to the needs of those who relied on it. You begin to see how much of this work depends on knowledge that is not written down here. It is learned, observed, repeated. You move along the row. Further ahead, a group gathers around a small cleared space. The plants here are younger, their leaves smaller, their stems more delicate. Someone kneels, guiding a plant into place, pressing the soil gently around its base. You step closer. The movement is careful, almost protective. Each plant is placed with intention, given space, given attention. It is not rushed, it cannot be. You realize way that time behaves differently here. Growth does not respond to urgency. It follows its own pace. You straighten and continue walking. The sun has risen higher now, its warmth more noticeable against your skin. The air remains thick, but there is a slight movement within it, a gentle shift that brings brief relief before settling again. You pass by another structure used for curing. This time the door is fully open. Inside, the leaves hang in longer rows, darker now, their colour deepening as they dry. The transformation is subtle but clear. What was once green becomes something richer, more complex. You step inside. The scent is stronger here, fuller, carrying a depth that lingers in your breath. It is not unpleasant, but it is intense in a quiet way, filling the space without overwhelming it. You walk slowly between the rows. The leaves sway slightly as you pass, brushing against one another, with a soft sound that repeats gently like a quiet whisper. The air feels still, held in place by the weight of what hangs around you. A commonly acknowledged point is that curing tobacco properly was just as important as growing it, as it determined the quality and value of the final product. Standing here, the importance feels tangible. This is not just storage, it is transformation. You reach out and touch one of the leaves. It feels different now, drier, more fragile. You let your hand fall back to your side. Nearby, someone adjusts a row, ensuring that the leaves hang evenly, not touching too closely. The care in the movement suggests that even small details matter here. You step back outside. The light feels sharper after the dim interior. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, then continue. The work continues around you, carrying bundles, checking leaves, preparing the next stage. Each action flows into the next without interruption. You begin to understand how this labour shapes the body, the bending, the lifting, the repetition. It settles into muscle and movement, becoming part of how you exist within this space. There is a quiet reflection often mentioned that tobacco work demanded constant attention, leaving little room for rest beyond what was necessary. As you move through the fields, that truth feels present. The work does not end. It shifts. It continues. You walk toward the edge of the field. From here, you can see the rows stretching out their pattern, repeating into the distance. It is not vast, but it is enough to suggest scale, enough to hint at how much effort is required to sustain it. You stand still for a moment. The air carries the scent, again lighter here, mixed with the earth, and the faint trace of the river beyond. A question appears quietly in your mind. Is this worth it? Not in a simple sense, but in the way that effort and reward must balance over time. Many historians continue to consider how tobacco reshaped Jamestown, bringing both opportunity and new forms of dependence. As you stand here, that balance feels uncertain, because while the plant offers possibility, it also demands everything in return. You take a slow breath. The rhythm of the work continues around you, steady and unbroken. You turn and begin to walk back. Your steps feel measured. Your body carries the weight of what you have seen, what you have begun to understand. The colony moves forward, guided now not only by survival, but by this crop that asks for constant attention. You follow that movement, your pace calm, your thoughts quiet. And as you do, the fields remain behind you, continuing their slow, patient work. You begin to hear the river differently now, not just as a distant presence, but as something active, something that carries more than water. As you walk toward its edge again, the air shifts slightly, bringing with it a faint scent of wood rope and something unfamiliar. It takes you a moment to recognize it. Tar, and beneath it something sharper. Goods, materials, movement. You step closer. The river is no longer just a boundary. It is a pathway. Its surface holds a quiet tension as if waiting. Then slowly you notice it. A shape emerging in the distance. Low, solid, moving with purpose. A ship. It does not rush toward the shore. It approaches steadily, guided by hands that understand the water far better than you do. The sight draws attention without needing to announce itself. People begin to shift their movements, changing direction, their pace adjusting. You follow. A firmly established historical reality is that Jamestown depended heavily on supply ships from England, which brought goods, tools, and sometimes new settlers, while also carrying tobacco back across the Atlantic. That exchange becomes visible here not as an idea, but as an event unfolding in front of you. The ship draws closer. You begin to see more detail, the lines of its structure, the way the wood sits against the water, the figures moving across its deck. They appear purposeful, their movements practiced, each action connected to the next. You step onto the firmer ground near the riverbank. The mud here is deeper, more uneven, shaped by repeated arrivals and departures. You adjust your footing, carefully aware that a misstep would not go unnoticed. The ship slows. Ropes are prepared. Voices carry across the water, not loud but clear. Instructions, responses. The language is familiar, yet shaped by distance and time. You watch as the vessel comes alongside. The moment is not dramatic. It is controlled, expected, and yet it carries weight. A quieter detail found in correspondence from the period suggests that settlers often waited anxiously for these ships, as their arrival could mean relief or disappointment depending on what they carried. That uncertainty lingers here even as the process begins. You see items being moved. Barrels, crates, bundles tied carefully with rope, each one handled with attention lowered or lifted with steady coordination. There is no rush, but no hesitation either. Every movement is part of a sequence that has been repeated many times. You stand back slightly, allowing the flow to continue. The air fills with new scents, salt, wood that has travelled far, a faint trace of something, preserved something stored for long journeys. You realise how different it smells from everything within the fort. This is not local. This has come from elsewhere. You watch as a crate is opened. Inside items are revealed, though not all are clear from where you stand. Tools perhaps, supplies, things that carry promise even if that promise is uncertain. There is a note often mentioned in historical writing that investors in England expected profits from Jamestown, shaping what was sent and what was demanded in return. That distant expectation reaches into this moment, though it is not visible in the objects themselves. It exists in the purpose behind them. You notice the people around you. Their expressions are focused, but there is something else beneath it. A quiet anticipation. Not excitement, but awareness. What arrives here matters. You move slightly closer. A bundle of tobacco leaves is carried toward the ship. You recognize them immediately. The same leaves you saw hanging, drying, transforming. Now they are being prepared for a different journey. Packed, secured, sent away. You follow the movement with your eyes. The exchange becomes clearer. What is grown here leaves. What is needed arrives. A cycle. You begin to see how the river connects this place to something far beyond its immediate surroundings. You glance at the ship again. It does not feel distant anymore. It feels like part of the colony, an extension of it. A curious observation appears in some lesser-known writings that goods sent back to England were sometimes of uneven quality in the early years as settlers learned how to meet expectations. That learning process is not visible in any single moment, but it is present in the care you see now, the way items are handled, The attention to detail, the quiet effort to ensure that what leaves here carries value. You step back once more. The activity continues, loading, unloading, checking, arranging. Each task flows into the next without interruption. You begin to notice how this moment changes the rhythm of the day. Work shifts. Attention narrows. The focus moves from the fields and the fort to this narrow strip of land where everything connects. You take a slow breath. The air feels different here. More open, less contained, yet still shaped by effort. There is a question that surfaces quietly in historical discussion about how dependent Jamestown became on this transatlantic exchange, and whether that dependence limited its ability to become self-sustaining. As you stand here watching the movement between shore and ship, the question feels present. Because without this connection, much of what you see might not continue, and yet relying on it brings its own uncertainty. You look around, the people, the goods, the ship that waits, then moves, then waits again. Everything is part of a system that stretches far beyond what you can see. You turn slightly, looking back toward the fort. It stands as it did before, unchanged in structure. But now you understand that it is not isolated. It is tied, this river, to these ships, to decisions made in places far from here. You begin to walk back. Your steps are steady, your pace calm. Behind you, the activity continues. The exchange does not stop. It flows just as the river does, carrying with it the future of this place, uncertain yet moving forward all the same. You move away from the river, but the sense of exchange stays with you. It follows in the way people speak, in the way tasks are assigned, in the quiet calculations that seem to guide every decision. As you walk through the fort again, you begin to notice another pattern beneath everything else. Time measured not only by the day, but by obligation. You pass a small group gathered near a wall. They are not working in the same steady rhythm you have seen elsewhere. Their movements are slower, less practiced. One adjusts a tool with uncertainty. Another watches closely as if trying to understand something that has not yet become familiar. You pause. There is a difference here. Not in effort, but in experience. A firmly grounded historical reality is that many labourers in early Jamestown were indentured servants. Individuals who agreed to work for a set number of years in exchange for passage to the New World. That agreement shapes what you see in front of you, though it is not written anywhere visible. It exists in posture, in pace, in expectation. You step closer, careful not to interrupt. One of them lifts a tool and begins a task, their movements careful but uneven. There is concentration in every action, as if each step must be thought through before it is taken. Another person nearby works with more ease, their motions fluid, practiced. The contrast is clear even without words. You begin to understand that time is experienced differently here. For some it stretches ahead with possibility. For others it is counted, measured, held against a promise that may or may not bring relief. A lesser highlighted detail in historical records is that not all indentured servants completed their terms, as disease and hardship often interrupted those agreements. The idea lingers quietly as you observe, adding weight to the effort you see. You move on. The fort continues around you, its rhythm unchanged on the surface. Work proceeds, supplies are managed, the day unfolds as it always does. But now you notice the layers beneath it. You pass by a figure sitting alone, their hands resting loosely in their lap. They are not idle, they are waiting. Not for instruction, but for the next moment when their effort will be required again. You wonder briefly how many days they have counted, how many remain. The thought does not stay long. There is too much else to notice. You walk toward a more open space where several people gather. A conversation unfolds in low tones. You catch fragments. Years, work, land. The words carry meaning even without full context. They suggest something beyond the present, something that lies ahead, uncertain but possible. You listen without stepping closer. There is a quiet understanding that for some, the end of service means the chance to claim land to begin something of their own. For others, it remains only an idea distant and unclear. You move on. Nearby, a task is underway. Wood is being cut and shaped, each piece prepared with attention. The work is steady, the rhythm consistent. But as you watch, you begin to notice who directs. Who directs and who follows. The distinction is not loud. It does not need to be. It is understood. You step back slightly, allowing the work to continue without your presence altering it. There is a subtle tension here, not open conflict, but a quiet awareness of position. Who decides? Who obeys? A curious note appears in some lesser-known accounts that servants sometimes negotiated or resisted their conditions in small ways, though rarely in ways that changed the system itself. That quiet resistance is not visible here, but the possibility of it lingers in the space between people. You walk along the inner edge of the fort. The walls feel the same beneath your hand when you brush against them. Rough, warm, familiar now. You pass another small group. This time their movements are more coordinated, their task clearly defined. They work together not out of choice perhaps, but out of necessity. The structure of the colony requires it. You begin to see how everything connects. Labour feeds the fields feed the trade sustains the colony, and within that system each person holds a place that is not always chosen. You take a slow breath. The air carries the same layers as before. Smoke, earth, effort, but now it feels shaped by something else as well. Expectation. You look around once more. The fort stands as it always has. The people move as they always do, and yet your understanding has shifted. You see not just the work, but the time behind it, the years counted, the agreements held, the uncertainty that follows each one. A question often explored in historical study is whether indentured servitude in early Virginia offered real opportunity or simply replaced one form of hardship with another. Standing here, the answer feels unresolved, because both seem present. You shift your weight and begin to walk again. Your steps are steady, your pace calm. The day continues, shaped by the same rhythms, the same structures, but now you move through it with a deeper awareness of time, of effort, of the quiet agreements that bind this place together. You continue forward, and around you the colony carries on one measured step at a time. You begin to notice the difference in space before you notice the difference in people. It appears in the way certain areas feel slightly less crowded, slightly more ordered. The ground is not smoother, but it is kept with a bit more intention. Objects are placed with care rather than simply set down. There is a quiet sense of separation here, not marked by walls, but by subtle changes in how things are arranged. You walk slowly, letting your eyes adjust. A structure stands nearby, larger than most you have seen so far. Its walls are straighter, its roof more carefully fitted. The wood looks newer in places, or perhaps better maintained. It does not stand in isolation, but it draws your attention without effort. You pause at a distance. There is movement inside, visible through the open doorway. Figures pass through the space with a steadiness that feels different from the more strained motion elsewhere in the fort. Their pace is not faster, just more certain. A clearly documented development in Jamestown's growth is that tobacco created wealth for some settlers, allowing them to build larger homes and establish more comfortable living conditions than others. That difference becomes visible here, not in luxury but in degrees. You step a little closer. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer, less disturbed. It suggests fewer people passing through, or perhaps more care taken to maintain it. Even the air feels slightly different, though you cannot say exactly how. Inside you see objects arranged in a more deliberate way, a table placed with intention, items grouped rather than scattered. It is not abundance, but it is order. You do not enter. The space feels occupied in a way that suggests it belongs to someone in particular, not to everyone. You remain outside observing. Nearby, another structure stands smaller, less refined. Its walls lean slightly, its surface marked by wear. The contrast between the two is not extreme, but it is clear. You turn your gaze between them. The difference is not just in materials. It is in what those materials represent. A quieter observation found in some accounts is that tobacco profits were uneven, with a small number of settlers gaining significant advantage while many others continued to struggle. That imbalance begins to take shape around you. You move on. The fort continues, but now you see it in layers. Spaces that hold more, spaces that hold less. People whose movements reflect that difference, even if only slightly. You pass by a figure carrying a bundle of leaves. Their posture is steady, but there is a weight in their steps that feels familiar. Effort without relief, Continuation without visible change. Further ahead, another figure walks with empty hands, their pace unhurried. They are not idle, but their role seems different. Less physical, perhaps, or simply less immediate. You notice the contrast, not sharp, but present. You walk toward a small clearing. Here a group gathers, their conversation low but focused. You catch fragments of their words. Land, yield, trade. The language carries a different tone than the conversations you have heard before. It is less about the present moment, more about what comes next, about expansion, about possibility. You stand at the edge listening. The discussion continues, steady and measured. There is a confidence in it, not loud but firm. It suggests that for some, the uncertainty of the early days has begun to shift into something else. You step back. The contrast lingers. You move through the fort again, your steps unhurried. The familiar rhythms continue. Work, movement, quiet conversation. Nothing has stopped. Nothing has become easier for most. And yet something has changed. You begin to see how success, even in small amounts, creates distance. Not physical distance, but experience. A lesser mentioned detail is that as wealth increased for some colonists, access to resources, land, and influence grew as well, reinforcing divisions that were not as visible in the earliest days. That process feels present now, unfolding quietly. You pass by a group working together. Their movements are coordinated, their focus steady. There is no sign that their work has lessened. The effort remains constant, unchanged by what you have just observed. You pause for a moment. The contrast settles into your understanding. This place is no longer defined only by survival. It is beginning to define itself by difference. You take a slow breath. The air carries the same scents as before, unchanged by these shifts. Smoke, earth, tobacco, effort. The environment remains constant even as the people within it begin to separate in subtle ways. You walk along the inner edge of the fort. Your hand brushes the wood again, the texture familiar now. It grounds you in the same physical reality that everyone shares regardless of their position. You look around once more. The larger structure, the smaller ones, the people moving between them, each part connected yet not equal. A question often explored by historians is whether the economic success brought by the tobacco strengthened the colony as a whole or deepened inequalities within it. As you move through this space, the answer feels complex, because both seem to be happening at once. You continue walking. Your steps are steady. Your awareness sharper. The colony carries on, shaped by the same rhythms, but now influenced by something new. Opportunity. And the uneven way it is distributed. You move forward, letting that understanding settle quietly within you. And around you, Jamestown continues to change, not all at once, but one small difference at a time. You step beyond the tighter cluster of buildings, and the space opens in a way that feels both relieving and unsettling. The fort no longer surrounds you. Its walls remain behind, visible but no longer defining your movement. Ahead, the land stretches outward, broken into separate clearings where life continues in a different pattern. The air feels wider in here, not cooler, not lighter, just less contained. You follow a narrow path worn into the ground, its direction shaped by repeated use rather than design. It leads you away from the shared center and into spaces that belong to individuals or small groups. The distance between structures grows. The sounds of the fort fade behind you, replaced by quieter, more isolated movements. A well-grounded historical understanding is that as Jamestown developed, settlers began establishing plantations beyond the original fort, spreading out along the river and surrounding land. That expansion changes what you see now. You approach the first of these spaces. A modest house stands alone, its structure simple but purposeful. Nearby, a small field stretches out, planted with the same familiar rows of tobacco. The work here feels more personal, less shared. Every task seems tied to the people who live within this space. You slow your steps. The quiet is noticeable. There are no overlapping sounds of many voices, no constant movement in every direction. Instead, there are isolated actions, a tool striking soil, a single voice calling out, the wind moving lightly through the leaves. You walk closer. A figure works in the field, their movement steady, practiced. They do not look up immediately. Their attention remains fixed on the task, as if each moment must be used carefully. You stand at a distance, observing. The work is the same as before. Planting, tending, adjusting. But here it carries a different weight. It belongs to fewer hands. A lesser discussed detail in some records is that living outside the fort often meant greater independence, but also greater risk as settlers were more exposed to the environment and potential conflict. That balance becomes clear as you stand here. Freedom and vulnerability. You continue along the path. Another structure appears set farther apart from the first. Its field is larger, the rows extending further, the work more extensive. You notice signs of greater activity here. More tools, more movement, a slightly stronger sense of organization. The difference is subtle but present. You begin to see how land shapes experience. The more space one holds, the more responsibility it demands. You step carefully as the ground shifts beneath you, softer in some places, firmer in others. The path is not consistent. It changes with the land adapting rather than imposing. You pass by a small clearing. Here a person sits near the edge of the field, their posture relaxed, but watchful. They are not working at this moment, but they are not at ease either. Their gaze moves across the land, scanning, attentive. You feel it too. The openness brings a different kind of awareness. Inside the fort, the walls define the limits of concern. Here there are no such boundaries. The horizon itself becomes something to consider. You move on. The distance between each place grows more noticeable. What was once a compact settlement becomes a series of separate lives, connected but not always close. A curious note found in some accounts is that as plantations expanded community ties, within the fort weakened, slightly replaced by more localized relationships. That shift lingers in the space between these structures. You feel it in the quiet, in the absence of constant presence, in the way each place seems to hold its own rhythm. You approach another field. This one is smaller, its rows shorter, its condition less uniform. Some plants grow well, others struggle. The unevenness is visible, reflecting differences in knowledge effort or perhaps luck. You pause. The work here feels more uncertain, more fragile. You begin to understand that expansion does not guarantee success. It only spreads the effort across a wider space. You take a slow breath. The air carries the same scent of tobacco, though lighter here, mixed with the open earth and distant trace of water. It feels less concentrated, more dispersed. You turn slightly, looking back toward the fort. It appears smaller now, not in size but in presence. The distance changes your perception of it. You realize how much it once defined everything, and how that definition is now shifting. A question often raised in historical study is whether this movement outward strengthened the colony by increasing production or weakened it by reducing cohesion and shared defense. As you stand between these scattered spaces, the answer feels uncertain, because both possibilities exist. You begin to walk again. Your steps follow the path, though it is less clear now, fading in places, reappearing in others. It reflects the nature of this expansion, not fully formed, still evolving. You pass by another dwelling. This one shows signs of care. The ground nearby is cleared, the edges defined. Small details suggest attention beyond necessity. It feels more settled, more established. You notice how each place tells a different story. Of effort, of success, of struggle. You continue forward. The sounds of the fort are now distant, barely reaching you. In their place, the quieter rhythm of these scattered lives takes over. You walk through it, observing, adjusting, understanding. This is no longer just a single settlement. It's becoming something broader, more complex, less unified. You slow your pace. The land stretches ahead, unchanged in its appearance, yet altered in its use. You take another breath. The air feels open, but not entirely free. There is still weight here, still effort, still uncertainty. You turn back towards the path that leads to the fort. Your steps are steady. Behind you, the fields continue their quiet work. Ahead, the settlement waits, still holding its place. And between them, you move aware now of how much this place has grown and how much that growth has changed everything. You sense it before you understand it. A shift in the air. Not in temperature, not in scent, but in the way people move. The rhythm that once felt steady begins to tighten like something drawn inward. Conversations shorten. Movements become sharper. Eyes linger a little longer on the edges of things. You step back toward the fort. The path feels familiar beneath your feet, but your attention is no longer on the ground. It moves outward, scanning, listening. The quiet you once accepted now feels different, less restful, more alert. You pass a figure moving quickly in the opposite direction. Their pace is faster than usual, their posture forward as if pulled by something unseen. They do not stop. They do not speak, but the urgency follows them, leaving a trace behind. You continue. The fort comes into view, its wooden walls unchanged, yet somehow different in your perception. What once felt like a boundary now feels like a place to return to, not for comfort, but for proximity. A clearly recorded event in the colony's history is the coordinated attack in 1622 by Powhatan forces, which resulted in the deaths of many English settlers and marked a turning point in relations between the two groups. As you move closer, the tension in the air begins to echo that reality, not as a sudden shock, but as a growing awareness. You enter the fort. Inside, the movement is no longer as evenly spaced. People gather in smaller groups, speaking in lower tones than usual. There is a focus in their expressions, a kind of attention that does not relax. You slow your steps. No one announces what has changed. No clear signal marks the moment. And yet everything feels different. You hear a voice, short, direct, then silence. You turn toward it, but the source is already gone absorbed into the movement of others. You notice how people position themselves now, closer to walls, near openings, within sight of one another. It is not organized in an obvious way, but it is not random either. It feels instinctive, shaped by something shared but not spoken. A lesser discussed detail in some accounts is that warnings of danger did not always come clearly, or in time leaving settlers to rely on instinct and fragmented information. That uncertainty lingers here, shaping behavior in subtle ways. You walk toward the center of the fort. The fire burns as it always does, but fewer people sit near it. The space feels less like a place of rest and more like a point of awareness. You pause briefly, then move on. A sound reaches you from beyond the walls. Not loud, but distinct. You stop. It is difficult to place. Not a voice. Not quite movement. Something between. You listen. The sound does not repeat. You continue walking, your steps slower now. Your body holds a quiet tension, not sharp but present. It does not demand action. It simply prepares you. You pass by a group gathered near one of the entrances. Their conversation is brief, their gestures minimal. They look outward more than inward, their attention fixed beyond the walls. You follow their gaze, but from where you stand there is nothing visible. Only distance. Only land. You move away. The fort feels smaller now, not in size but in certainty. The walls that once defined safety now feel like a thin line between what is known and what is not. A commonly explored question among historians is whether the 1622 attack could have been anticipated or prevented given the tensions that existed. As you stand within these walls, the question feels unresolved, because awareness does not always lead to clarity, and tension does not always reveal when it will change. You walk along the inner edge of the fort. Your hand brushes the wood again, the texture grounding you in something physical, something certain. It remains the same, rough, solid, present. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier, though nothing has changed in its composition. It is the awareness that shifts it, the sense that something could happen even if it has not yet. You pass by a doorway. Inside, a figure sits still, their posture upright, their gaze distant. They are not resting, they are listening. The stillness carries weight as if every sound matters. You move on. The usual rhythms of work have not stopped entirely. Tools still move. Tasks continue. But everything is quieter. More contained, as if the colony itself has drawn inward, conserving something you cannot fully name. You pause once more. The silence stretches, then breaks. A voice calls out. Clear. Brief. You turn. Movement follows. Not chaos. Not panic. But a shift. People reposition. Attention sharpens. You feel it. A moment where everything balances between stillness and action. Then slowly the rhythm begins to return. Not fully. Not as before. But enough. The voice is lower again. The movement spread out. The tension does not disappear. It settles. You take another breath. The air remains the same, and yet it does not feel the same. You begin to understand that this place is not only shaped by what happens, but by what might happen, by the awareness of it. You turn and walk toward the center once more. Your steps are steady, your pace calm, but beneath it something has changed. A layer added, a quiet readiness. You continue forward, and around you the colony holds itself together, not only through work and structure, but through the shared understanding that the balance it depends on is never entirely secure. You feel the change in the way people move again, but this time it settles into something more structured rather than uncertain. The tension that once hovered quietly now seems to have been shaped into rules, into patterns that guide behavior more clearly. As you walk through the fort, you notice how actions appear more deliberate, less drifting, less hesitation. People move with purpose, but also with awareness, as if each step exists within a set of expectations that are no longer optional. You pass a small open space where several individuals stand in a loose line. They are not working, they are waiting. A figure stands before them, speaking in a calm but firm tone. The words are not loud, yet they carry weight. You do not hear everything, but you understand enough. Instruction, correction, expectation. A well-established historical reality is that as Jamestown stabilized systems of law and governance became more formalized, including the establishment of the House of Burgesses in 1619, one of the first representative assemblies in English America. That shift towards structure begins to show itself here, not only in decisions but in daily behavior. You slow your steps. The group listens. No one interrupts. No one looks away for long. The moment feels contained, purposeful. You continue walking once it concludes. The individuals disperse, each moving with a slightly adjusted awareness, as if reminded of something that must be followed. You begin to notice how this structure extends beyond moments like that. It appears in the way tools are stored, in the way tasks are organized, in the way people interact with one another. Everything carries a subtle order. A quieter observation found in historical discussions is that laws in early Virginia could be strict, often reflecting the need to maintain control in a fragile environment. That strictness does not appear as constant enforcement, but as a presence that shapes behavior before action is even taken. You feel it in the air, not heavy, but steady. You walk along the inner edge of the fort. The walls remain unchanged, yet the space they enclose feels more defined now. Not just physically, but socially. Each area seems to hold a purpose more clearly than before. You pass by a storage area. Items are arranged with greater precision. Barrels aligned, tools placed in consistent positions. It is not perfect, but it is intentional. You pause for a moment. The difference is subtle, yet it carries meaning. Order reduces uncertainty, and here that matters. You continue. A figure approaches from the opposite direction. They slow slightly as they pass you. Their posture upright, their expression neutral. There is a brief acknowledgement, then they move on. The interaction is small, but it feels shaped by expectation rather than spontaneity. You begin to see how behavior itself has become part of the structure, not just what people do, but how they do it. You move toward the center of the fort. The fire burns as it always does, steady and practical. People gather nearby, but their movements are more contained now. Conversations remain low-measured, as if shaped by the same order that guides everything else. You take a seat briefly. The ground feels familiar beneath you, firm, uneven, real. You watch. A task is completed nearby. The tools are returned to their place. The movement is smooth, almost automatic. It suggests repetition, habit. You rise again. There is a small detail sometimes mentioned in that punishments for breaking rules could be swift and public, reinforcing the importance of maintaining order. You do not see such a moment here, but the awareness of it seems to linger in the way people carry themselves. You walk toward a quieter section. A single figure works alone, their movements precise, their focus steady. There is no sign of distraction. Each action follows the last without pause. You observe briefly, then move on. The rhythm of the colony feels more stable now, not because the challenges have disappeared, but because the response to them has become more organized. You pass by a group engaged in conversation. Their voices are low, their gestures minimal. The exchange appears structured as if even discussion follows an unspoken pattern. You do not linger. There is a sense that everything here has a place, a time, a way of being done. You continue walking. Your steps feel aligned with the space around you. Not forced, but guided. A question often explored in historical study is whether the development of governance in Jamestown created true stability or simply imposed order on an already fragile system. As you move through the fort, the answer feels layered, because the structure does hold things together, but it does not remove the underlying challenges. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same, the sense unchanged, and yet the experience of moving through it has shifted. You're no longer navigating uncertainty alone. You are moving within a system, one that shapes your actions, your pace, your awareness. You look around once more. The people, the movement, the quiet order that connects it all. It is not perfect. It is not complete, but it is present. You begin to walk again, your steps steady, your pace calm. The colony continues, now held together not only by effort, but by the structure that has grown around it. And within that structure, you move forward one measured step at a time. You begin to sense the passage of time not through the sky, but through the land itself. The ground beneath your feet feels more familiar now, shaped by repeated movement and quiet habit. The paths are clearer not because they have been marked deliberately, but because they have been used again and again. Each step you take feels less uncertain, as if your body has learned what your mind once questioned. You walk beyond the fort once more. The scattered plantations you saw before now seem less distant, more connected in a way that does not rely on closeness. Smoke rises from separate hearths, thin and steady, marking each place as its own centre of life. The air carries faint traces of tobacco lighter, here blending with the open earth. An established historical pattern shows that by the 1620s, tobacco had become the dominant crop in Virginia, driving expansion, shaping settlement patterns, and influencing nearly every aspect of colonial life. As you move through this landscape, that influence is no longer subtle. It is everywhere. You approach a field where the plants stretch further than before. The rows extend outward in a more confident pattern, the spacing consistent, the growth more uniform. The work here feels practice refined through repetition. What once seemed uncertain now carries a sense of expectation. You walk along the edge. The leaves move slightly in the air, their surfaces catching light in a muted way. The scent lingers familiar now, no longer sharp but present in the background of everything. A figure works nearby. Their movements are steady, their posture relaxed in a way that suggests experience rather than ease. They do not rush. They do not hesitate. Each action follows naturally from the last. You watch for a moment. There is a rhythm here that feels established. Not new, not experimental, but learned. A lesser-known note from historical records mentions that tobacco was sometimes used as a form of currency in early Virginia, valued not only as a crop but as a measure of worth. That idea begins to settle into your understanding as you observe the care given to each plant. This is not just labor. It is value made visible. You continue walking. The path leads you past another dwelling, larger than the last you saw in this area. The structure stands with a quiet confidence, its edges defined, its space maintained with care. Nearby additional storage structures suggest a level of production beyond basic survival. You pause briefly. The difference is noticeable, not overwhelming, but clear. You move on. Further along, a smaller field appears less uniform, its rows uneven, its growth inconsistent. The contrast between the two spaces is immediate. It reflects not only effort but access to land, to knowledge, to time. You begin to understand how tobacco has not only sustained the colony but reshaped it. It determines where people settle, how they work, what they aim for. You step carefully as the ground shifts beneath you. The soil here feels dry in places, softer in others. It responds to the same forces as before, but now shaped more deliberately by human hands. You look toward the river. Though you cannot see it clearly from here, you sense its presence. The connection remains, the movement of goods, the exchange that ties this land to something larger. A thoughtful point raised in historical analysis is whether the rapid expansion of tobacco cultivation led to long-term environmental strain as land was cleared and soil was heavily used. As you stand among these fields, the question feels grounded, because growth here is not without cost. You take a slow breath. The air feels open, yet carries the same quiet weight. It does not press as heavily as within the fort, but it does not fully release you either. You continue walking. The scattered nature of the settlement becomes more apparent. Each plantation holds its own rhythm, its own pace, its own challenges. The shared experience of the fort has stretched outward, becoming something more distributed, more complex. You pass by a small group gathered near a field. Their conversation is focused, their gestures minimal. You catch fragments again. Yield, quality, exchange. The words repeat, but the tone has shifted. It is less about survival now, more about improvement, about comparison, about standing among others. You do not linger. The meaning is clear. This place has begun to measure itself, not only by whether it endures, but by how well it performs. A question that continues to appear in historical discussion is whether this focus on tobacco strengthened Virginia's economy while narrowing its dependence on a single crop. As you move through these fields, the answer feels present but unresolved, because success and dependence grow together. You turn slowly, looking back across the land, the fort in the distance, the scattered homes, the fields stretching between them. Everything connected, yet not contained. You begin to walk back. Your steps are steady, your pace calm. The rhythm of the colony continues, but it has changed. It is no longer defined only by immediate survival. It is shaped by ambition, by growth, by the quiet pursuit of something more. You move through that landscape, aware now of how deeply tobacco has taken root not only in the soil, but in the structure of life itself. And as you continue, the air carries that presence with you, steady and unbroken. You return toward the fort as the light begins to soften again. It happens gradually, the brightness of the day easing into a gentler glow that settles over the land without urgency. The air feels the same, still carrying its quiet weight, yet your steps move with less effort now. Not because anything has become easier, but because you have learned how to move within it. The walls of the fort rise ahead, familiar in their uneven lines. You pass through the entrance once more. Inside, the movement continues, though slower now. The day has taken its share of energy, and what remains is used carefully. People move with a kind of quiet efficiency, completing what must be done before the light fades further. You walk through the centre. The fire burns low again, its glow steady, its warmth modest. A few figures sit nearby, their posture relaxed in the way that comes only after effort has been spent. No one speaks loudly. The voices that do rise remain soft, contained. A broadly accepted historical reality is that Jamestown endured through years of uncertainty, adapting gradually into a more stable colony despite its difficult beginnings. As you stand here, that endurance feels less like a single achievement and more like a long, continuous process. You take a seat near the edge of the firelight. The ground feels the same as always, firm, uneven, real beneath you. You adjust slightly, finding a position that allows your body to rest without fully letting go. You look around. The structures remain as they have been shaped by a repair and repetition. The people move as they always do, guided by habit, by necessity, by the quiet systems that now hold everything together. And yet nothing feels exactly as it did when you first arrived. You can sense the changes in the fields beyond the fort, in the scattered homes that now define the land, in the quiet differences between people, in the steady presence of tobacco shaping nearly every part of life. A lesser-known observation in some accounts is that early colonists often did not recognize how profoundly their daily choices would shape the future of the colony. Standing here now, that idea settles gently into your thoughts. Because what you have seen is not a single story, it is many, layered, connected. You lower your gaze to the fire. The flames move slowly, their light steady, their presence constant. They do not change the world around you. They simply exist within it, offering what they can. You take a slow breath. The air feels familiar. The scents no longer demand your attention. They rest quietly in the background. You feel your shoulders relax slightly. Not completely, but enough. A question that continues to appear in historical reflection is whether Jamestown's survival was the result of careful planning or simple persistence. As you sit here, the answer feels less important than the experience itself, because survival here is not a single decision. It is a series of made every day. You shift slightly, allowing your body to settle more fully. The sounds around you soften further. The crackle of the fire, the faint movement of someone nearby, the distant echo of work that has not quite ended but no longer demands attention. You close your eyes briefly, not to sleep, just to rest within the moment. When you open them again, the light has dimmed further. The edges of the fort blur, slightly softened by shadow. The world becomes smaller, defined by the reach of the fire and the presence of those around you. You notice how everything feels slower now. The pace of the day has eased. The urgency has faded. What remains is quieter, more contained. You lean back slightly, your posture supported by the ground beneath you. Your breathing slows, steady, even. The thoughts that once moved quickly now drift more gently, like the smoke rising into the dimming air. You begin to reflect. Reflect on the river that carried both hope and uncertainty, on the fields that demanded constant care, on the walls that offered protection yet never complete safety, on the people who moved through it all, each carrying their own measure of effort, of time, of quiet endurance. The memory of it settles into something softer, less immediate, more distant. You take another slow breath. The air feels calm. The fire continues its quiet movement. Around you the colony rests not fully still, but quieter than before. You allow your body to sink a little deeper into that stillness. There is nothing more required of you in this moment. No task waiting, no decision pressing, only this. The gentle fading of the day, the steady rhythm of your breath, the quiet presence of a place that has asked much and given just enough in return. You close your eyes once more. The sounds soften further. The light dims. The world narrows gently, not into darkness, but into calm. And as you rest there, the story of this place drifts with you. No longer sharp, no longer demanding, but simply present, like a memory settling into sleep. Sweet dreams.